Hello, and welcome to the Strategic Storytelling Podcast, the podcast where you'll learn how to communicate like a pro by leveraging the power of stories. I'm your host, Cesar Castro, and like always, thank you. Thank you for being here, listening to this new episode, for taking time out of your busy schedule to learn what I believe is the most important communication skill that you can learn as a business professional, as a business leader, which is strategic storytelling. Now, if this is your first time listening to this episode, if you enjoy it, obviously, please subscribe. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to it. Just subscribe so that way when new episodes come out, you can be notified right away and you can continue this amazing journey of learning how to become a strategic storyteller. Now, in this episode number 5, I'm going to share with you what I call the 5 filters. And it's the 5 filters to help you choose great stories. And to give you a little bit of context of why this is so important, in previous episodes, I've talked about one of the most important or one of the most common, we'll say one of the most common questions that I usually get from my clients, which is, how do I find good stories? And hopefully through the previous episodes, you've been able to learn some of those valuable tips and suggestions to help you with that. Now, another of the common questions that I get from my coaching, consulting, and business clients is, okay, I've got stories that I've been able to find. Now, how do I choose which one is the best? How do I choose which one is the best? And I'm going to be very practical in this episode because I'm sure that you've been applying some of the actions that I've been inviting you to take, and that should lead you to have a good number of potential stories that you've been able to dig up. And if you have, you'll probably be asking yourself, okay, I've got these stories that I've been able to find, but now how do I decide which one to go with? How do I know which one is good? Because not all stories, just so you know, not all stories can become good or great strategic stories. And we're going to talk about this in a future episode when we get into how to craft stories. That to have a strategic story, you need certain elements. And to me, actually picking the best story is kind of like prospecting for gold. You know, in the olden days, back in the golden rush days, people would prospect for gold in the rivers. They would use what's called a golden pan, which had it was a pan that had a little net inside of it to filter the sand and the other elements that would be washed downstream. And it was a great tool to wash free the gold particles from the loose surface. The pan was a type of filter that would help these people find the key element, which in this case was the gold. Now I'm going to be sharing with you 5 filters. Let's say they're type of pans that we can use to separate the good from the great, especially when it comes to stories. Because in stories, there are certain elements that we need to find so we can be sure that this story can later become a strategic story. So take your pencil, your paper, whatever you use usually to take notes, and write down these 5 filters that I'll be sharing with you, because I know that they will make all the difference when it comes to being able to choose a great story. So what are the filters that you need to have? Filter number one is what I call details. Details. So in any story, especially these stories that you're now starting to find, you need to ask yourself the question, do I remember details? And by details, I mean, do you remember when it happened? Do you remember where it happened? Do you remember who it happened to? Do you even remember how you felt in certain moments of your story? And even though this sounds obvious, I've had clients, trust me, I've had these clients who at times tell me, Cesar, I have a story that I think it's a good story. And when I ask them, well, when did it happen? Oh, geez, I don't remember how long ago. And where did it happen? Oh, I don't really remember like where it happened. And do you remember if there were people in the story, other people with you, or how you felt? And at times they don't remember none of that. They just kind of remember that it's a good story, but they're missing all these details, which especially when we're talking about stories that we're going to be using in our business or professional life, we don't want to be making up stuff. That's why it's important. And that's why one of the key filters to be able to find a great story is knowing that you have details, that you remember details from the story. That is the first filter that I want you to have. And the question that I want you to write down is, do I remember details? The second filter, characters. Characters. And this is a key element in any good story, are the characters. The characters. When you have fun, entertaining, conflicting characters, it gets your audience much more emotionally invested. To be honest with you, when we listen to a story, what really gets us to connect initially with any story are the characters, specifically the main character. So when you're telling a story and you want people to really connect with that story, it has to have characters. And the more entertaining the characters, usually the better. So the question here, to be able to apply the second filter, is, are there characters in my story? Are they good characters? If they are, now you can, write down a little check mark. Now you have the second filter to be able to choose whether you have a good story or not. The third filter is struggle. Does your stories have some kind of struggle, some kind of opposition, conflict? Now, this is, to me, one of the most important, if not the most important, element that a story needs to have. Because at the end, what really gets us to connect emotionally and gets us to stay with a story is the struggle. Every story usually has a struggle. Now, the only warning that I'd give you here is that when we're talking about struggle, you don't have to have a Hollywood struggle. Okay, stories don't always have to be Hollywood, and most of us don't have Hollywood stories. We have very simple, sincere stories of things that happen to us in our personal life or in our business life or with our clients. There's actually a story that I tell. I'm not going to go into detail here. I'll probably share it in a future episode, where I talk about my struggle trying to give my youngest son his medication. He was sick. He needed to take medication. My wife was gone. It was up to me to do it. And I couldn't find the way to get him to take his medication because obviously at that time he was 4 years old. He didn't want to take his medication. And my whole story is about how I overcome this struggle of giving my son his medication. Now, if you think about it, there's nothing Hollywood about trying to give your son medication, but that story is actually one of my key stories that I use in keynotes, in conferences, in trainings, because it really gets people to connect. So the third filter that I want you to see if these stories that you're finding have is struggle. Ask yourself the question, is there some kind of struggle in the story? Now you have three filters so far: details, characters, struggle. The fourth filter is lesson. Does the story leave some kind of a lesson? Does it help you to communicate a lesson, an idea, or a message? And this is key because, again, we're talking about strategic storytelling. And when we're creating a strategic story should always leave the audience with some kind of a lesson, with some kind of a message or an idea. It's not just about telling stories because they're funner, because they're more engaging, because they're more emotional. Yes, all those things are true about stories, but we also want to make sure that our stories are educational, are motivational, that they inspire or motivate our audience to change. And one of the ways we do this is obviously by using the story as a vehicle to be able to transport that lesson or that idea or that message to the mind and the hearts of our audience. So the fourth filter that you always have to evaluate when you're picking your stories is, does this story help me communicate the lesson that I want to communicate, or the idea that I want to communicate to my audience? That is the fourth filter. And the fifth filter, which this one's a very personal one for me, and it's one that I always teach my clients: enjoyment. Do you enjoy telling this story? And especially, would you enjoy telling that story in the context where you want to tell it? And this is important because when we talk about public speaking, and most people, when they ask me for help with public speaking, they want to be very engaging and they want to be able to inspire and generate emotion. And I always tell them, I mean, there are techniques, obviously, to work with your voice and your pauses and your gestures. There are techniques for that. But to me, the basis, one of the strong bases that we need to have when it comes to telling a story, is that we have to enjoy telling that story. If you don't enjoy it, I promise you, people will feel that. When you tell a story, especially if it's your story, if it's your brand story, if it's a story about something that happened with a client, and you enjoy telling that story to the audience that you're telling that story to, they will feel that. And it will make you look as a more confident and a more engaging communicator and storyteller. So these are the 5 filters. And I'm going to go over them really quick again, just so if you're writing these down, you can make sure that you got them right. Filter number 1, details. Do you remember details? Filter number 2, characters. Does your story have characters? Filter number 3, struggle. Does your story have some kind of struggle, conflict? Filter number 4, does it help you communicate the lesson or the idea that you want to communicate? And filter number 5, do you enjoy it? Do you enjoy, or would you enjoy telling this story in the context that you want to share the story in that meeting or that conference, or maybe you're going to do a live on social media? Would you enjoy telling that story to the audience that you're trying to communicate it to? So in a very practical way, if you have, let's say, 3 or 4 potential stories that you've been able to dig up, all you have to do now is just evaluate it with these 5 filters. So story number 1, you ask yourself, do I remember details? Yes, check. Does this story have characters, entertaining characters? Yes, check. Does this story have some kind of a struggle? Yes, check. Does this story help me communicate the lesson or the idea? Check. And could I see myself telling this story and enjoying telling this story? Yes, check. So story number 1, if we're doing the exercise here, story number 1 has all 5 filters, which means, and this I can tell you with almost 100% surety, which means that if we were to use that story and want to craft it and transform it into strategic story, you have all the elements. This story has all the crucial elements that you need to be able to transform it into a strategic story. So this is how it works. You find stories first, and then you make them pass through these filters. The ones that come out with the most checks, they have all 5 filters or 4 filters. Those are the ones that you can be sure of that will work. Those are the stories that afterwards, when you want to craft them and work on them and do all the process that comes after, you can be sure that that time invested will be worth it, because you will be able to transform that story into a strategic story, because it accomplishes, or it has the 5 filters that are the key elements to have a golden, great story. So I want to invite you, next time that you're doing this process, you found a bunch of stories and you're trying to pick which one is the best, which one should I use the 5 filters to choose the best story. The more you do this exercise, the more you learn how to use these 5 filters, the better you'll get at discerning or picking between bad, good, and great stories. That's the idea. That's the idea. So that is my invitation for you, to use these 5 filters so you can quickly discern and decide which one out of all these stories that you're finding, that you're listening to, which one is the best, to be able to later work on it and transform it into a strategic, powerful, persuasive story. Thank you very much for being here with me during this 5th episode. Remember that if you or your company need to become more persuasive and influential communicators, just visit my website, www.cesarcastro.com, and learn all the different ways that I can help you. Again, www.cesarcastro.com, and you can begin your journey of transformation. Because remember, all great leaders are also great communicators, and all great leaders are especially great storytellers. Thank you for listening to the Strategic Storytelling Podcast. Remember, if you still haven't subscribed, wherever you listen to it, just do it. Just subscribe so that way you can follow the podcast and be notified when our newest episode come out. And most importantly, so you can continue to learn how to communicate like a pro by leveraging the power of stories. Bye-bye.